The silence hit the airwaves at exactly 2:17 p.m. on March 8, 1980. One moment, Bob Marley's voice was flowing through 15 radio stations across New York City, and the next, it was gone. Banned. Erased. Silenced by a corporate decree that would spark the most powerful musical protest in broadcasting history. Frank Morrison, CEO of Metropolitan Radio Networks, had just made the biggest mistake of his career by deciding that black music doesn't belong on sophisticated airwaves. What he didn't expect was that Bob Marley would bring his music directly to Morrison's doorstep, turning a busy Manhattan street into a concert hall and forcing an entire city to choose between prejudice and justice. If you love discovering the untold stories behind music history's most incredible moments, please like this video and subscribe to our channel. Hit that notification bell because we uncover the hidden gems that shaped the legends we know today. Metropolitan Radio Network's headquarters, 47th Street, Manhattan, March 8, 1980, 2:00 p.m. Frank Morrison sat in his corner office on the 23rd floor, looking out over the bustling streets of Midtown Manhattan. As CEO of the largest radio conglomerate on the East Coast, Morrison controlled 15 stations that reached over 8 million listeners daily. Morrison was a 54-year-old businessman who had built his empire on what he called premium programming for discerning audiences. In his mind, that meant classical music, easy listening, and contemporary pop that appealed to what he considered cultured listeners, which, in Morrison's world, meant white, middle-class, suburban audiences. That afternoon, Morrison had called an emergency meeting with his 15 station managers. The topic was Bob Marley, whose music had been gaining significant airplay across Metropolitan's network. "Gentlemen," Morrison announced to the room full of radio executives, "we have a problem. Our stations have been playing increasing amounts of reggae music, specifically Bob Marley's songs. This needs to stop immediately." Station manager Tom Richardson from WMTR raised his hand. "Mr. Morrison, Bob Marley's songs are extremely popular. Our listener ratings spike whenever we play No Woman, No Cry or One Love. The audience loves his music." Morrison's face hardened. "Tom, we're not in the business of catering to every trend. We maintain sophisticated programming standards. Reggae music, with its origins and associations, simply doesn't align with our brand image." Sarah Chen, program director for WNYP, looked uncomfortable. "Sir, are you suggesting we stop playing Bob Marley because he's Jamaican?" "I'm suggesting," Morrison replied coldly, "that we stop playing music that doesn't represent the values and standards our core audience expects. Bob Marley's music promotes ideas that are inconsistent with mainstream American values." "What ideas?" Tom pressed. "Love, unity, peace?" Morrison stood up, his voice becoming more authoritative. "Let me be clear. Bob Marley represents a culture of drug use, anti-establishment sentiment, and frankly, a lifestyle that our advertisers don't want associated with their brands. Effective immediately, all Bob Marley songs are banned from Metropolitan Radio Network stations." The room fell silent. Several managers exchanged uncomfortable glances. "Furthermore," Morrison continued, "we'll be implementing new programming guidelines that prioritize artists who represent traditional American values and appeal to our sophisticated listener base." What Morrison was saying, without explicitly stating it, was that he was banning black music from his stations. The subtext was clear to everyone in the room. Within hours, Bob Marley's music disappeared from 15 radio stations across New York City. Songs that had been in regular rotation were removed from playlists. DJs were instructed not to take requests for reggae music. The ban didn't go unnoticed. By the next morning, Metropolitan Radio's phone lines were flooded with complaints. Listeners were angry and confused about why their favorite songs had suddenly vanished from the airwaves. More importantly, the story reached Bob Marley himself. Bob was staying at the Plaza Hotel while in New York for meetings about his upcoming American tour. His manager, Don Taylor, brought him the news over breakfast. "Bob, we have a problem. Metropolitan Radio Networks just banned all your music from their 15 stations." Bob looked up from his morning tea. "Banned? For what reason?" The CEO, Frank Morrison, told his staff that reggae music doesn't align with their sophisticated programming standards. He basically said your music promotes anti-American values. Bob was quiet for a long moment. "Don, what do you know about this Frank Morrison?" "He's powerful, controls a lot of the East Coast radio market. Word is spreading that he's telling other radio networks to follow his lead." Bob nodded thoughtfully. "And where is Metropolitan Radio's headquarters?" "Midtown Manhattan, 47th Street. "Why?" Bob stood up and walked to the hotel window, looking out at the city. "Don, can you get me my acoustic guitar?" "Bob, what are you thinking?" "I'm thinking that if Mr. Morrison doesn't want my music on his radio stations, perhaps I should bring my music directly to him." By noon on March 9th, Bob Marley stood on the sidewalk across from Metropolitan Radio Network's headquarters, carrying nothing but his acoustic guitar and a small amplifier powered by a car battery. He didn't announce his plans. He didn't alert the media. He simply set up on the public sidewalk and began to play. Bob started with "Get Up, Stand Up," his song about fighting for your rights. His voice carried clearly across the busy Manhattan street, mixing with the sounds of traffic and city life. At first, only a few passers-by stopped to listen, but within minutes, word began to spread. "That's Bob Marley singing, across from Metropolitan Radio." Office workers on lunch breaks began gathering. Tourists pulled out cameras. Local residents who recognized the music came down from their apartments. 23 floors above, Frank Morrison was in a board meeting when his secretary knocked urgently on the conference room door. "Mr. Morrison, I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's a situation outside the building." "What kind of situation?" "Bob Marley is performing a concert on the street, right across from our entrance." Morrison walked to his office window and looked down. What he saw made his stomach drop. Hundreds of people had gathered around Bob, who was sitting on a small stool, playing his guitar and singing directly toward Metropolitan Radio's building. From his office window, Morrison could see Bob clearly. The musician was looking up at the building as he sang, as if delivering a personal message. "Sir," Morrison's secretary continued, "there are news crews arriving. Local TV stations, newspapers, the crowd is getting larger." Down on the street, Bob continued his impromptu concert. He played "No Woman, No Cry," and hundreds of voices joined in. He played "Three Little Birds," and the crowd swayed together in the middle of Manhattan. But it was when Bob began speaking between songs that the real power of his protest became clear. "Good afternoon, New York," Bob said into his small microphone. "I'm here today because there are people in that building," he gestured toward Metropolitan Radio, "who decided that my music isn't good enough for their radio stations." The crowd booed and called out in support. "They said my music doesn't represent sophisticated American values," Bob continued. "But I want to ask you something. What values does music represent? Does music represent the color of the person singing it? Or does music represent the message in the song?" The crowd cheered in response. "When I sing about love, is that a Jamaican value or a human value? When I sing about unity, is that a black value or a universal value? When I sing about standing up for your rights, is that anti-American, or is that the most American idea of all? Bob's words carried clearly through the afternoon air, amplified not just by his microphone, but by the passion of his delivery. Inside Metropolitan Radio's headquarters, panic was setting in. The protest was being broadcast live on competing radio stations. Television news crews were interviewing people in the crowd. Social media, in its early forms, was spreading word about the demonstration across the city. Frank Morrison was fielding angry phone calls from advertisers, board members, and other radio executives who were questioning his decision to ban Bob Marley's music. "Frank," said Rebecca Walsh, Metropolitan Radio's head of public relations, "this is becoming a disaster. We're being portrayed as racist censors, and Bob Marley is coming across as a peaceful activist being silenced for his race." Morrison looked out his window again. The crowd had grown to over 1,000 people. Police had arrived, but only to manage traffic flow. They weren't interfering with Bob's performance. Bob played for over 2 hours, drawing from his entire catalog of songs. Each song carried new meaning in this context. Exodus became about leaving behind prejudice. One Love became a direct challenge to those who wanted to divide people by race. Redemption Song became a call to free minds from the mental slavery of discrimination. Throughout the performance, Bob occasionally looked up at the Metropolitan Radio building, particularly toward the upper floors where he seemed to know Frank Morrison was watching. During one such moment, Bob spoke directly to Morrison, though the radio executive was 23 floors above. "Mr. Morrison," Bob said, his voice carrying through the crowd and up toward the building, "you tried to silence my voice by banning my music from your radio stations. But you forgot something important. Music doesn't live in radio stations. Music lives in people's hearts, and hearts can't be silenced by corporate decisions." The crowd erupted in cheers and applause. "You can ban my music from your airwaves," Bob continued, "but you can't ban the message of love, unity, and justice that music carries. That message will find a way to reach people, whether through radio, through concerts, or through moments like this when we all come together as one human family." Inside the building, Frank Morrison was feeling the pressure from every direction. His phone hadn't stopped ringing. Advertisers were threatening to pull their contracts. Board members were demanding explanations. Other radio stations were calling his decision un-American censorship. But the most damaging pressure was coming from his own employees. Tom Richardson, the station manager who had questioned the ban from the beginning, knocked on Morrison's office door. "Mr. Morrison, the staff is asking questions about company policy, specifically whether we're now banning all black artists or just Bob Marley." Morrison realized the impossible position he had created. By banning Bob Marley for what were essentially racial reasons disguised as programming standards, he had opened Metropolitan Radio to accusations of systematic discrimination. "Furthermore," Tom continued, "we're losing listeners by the hour. People are switching to other stations that still play reggae and other diverse music. Our ratings are plummeting." Morrison looked out his window again. The crowd around Bob had grown to over 2,000 people. The demonstration was becoming a city-wide event. At 4:30 p.m., Bob made an announcement that surprised everyone. "My friends," he said to the massive crowd, "I want to thank you for standing with music, standing with justice, standing with love over fear. I'm going to play one more song, and then I want you to take this energy, this unity, this love, and carry it with you into your lives." Bob extended his hand to Morrison. "Mr. Morrison, we all make mistakes. What matters is what we do when we realize we've been wrong." Morrison shook Bob's hand as the crowd applauded. Effective immediately, Morrison announced to the gathered crowd. Metropolitan radio networks will not only resume playing Bob Marley's music, but we'll be expanding our programming to include more diverse artists and perspectives. We want our stations to reflect the beautiful diversity of the communities we serve. The crowd erupted in celebration, but Bob held up his hand for quiet. Mr. Morrison, I appreciate your apology. But more than that, I appreciate your commitment to change. Music has the power to bring people together, but only if we let it. Thank you for choosing unity over division. That evening, Bob Marley's music returned to Metropolitan Radio Network stations. But more importantly, Morrison followed through on his commitment to diversify programming across all 15 stations. Within months, Metropolitan Radio became known for having the most diverse and inclusive programming in New York radio. Morrison hired more Black and Latino DJs, expanded the variety of music genres, and created community programming that reflected the city's multicultural population. Bob's street protest had not only reversed a discriminatory ban, but had transformed an entire radio network's approach to programming. The story of Bob Marley's Sidewalk concert became legendary in both music and civil rights circles. It was cited as an example of how peaceful protest through art could create meaningful change. Frank Morrison became an advocate